Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
Our episode here today is with a good friend of Pathify, somebody that I've worked with on a forthcoming article for the next edition of the Pathify magazine that's coming out in fall 2023. So as of the recording and publishing this episode, the magazine article will still be kind of forthcoming, but you can keep an eye out for that. But just really excited to kind of dig in deeper and get to know our guest Jared here a little bit more and his really unique background. So Jared, if you want to introduce yourself briefly, kind of give a little overview of your background, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah, my goal in life is to help education use technology to bring learning to the people. And that's really a reflection of my career, where the first half was within universities, leading teams that developed and launched new fully online programs and courses, and also using technology to help faculty improve the student experience. And it was in 2011 that I took a pretty big risk and joined a relatively unknown EdTech startup called Instructure, where I held a bunch of roles, primarily focused on developing their messaging to be authentic and to their product strategy, and generally ensuring that Instructure did the right things for both their customers and the growth of their business. Today, I run a small consulting firm called Rarebird, which helps early and growth stage EdTech companies avoid some of what I would call destructive failures that might be in their path and really help them make a positive impact faster.
Yeah, and so I definitely want to talk about early days of Instructure, because I feel like that'll be a unique kind of a point of view on sort of the experience that sort of is happening right now for kind of the whole sector. But you kind of were alluding to it, I guess, of sort of the mission or the outcomes that you've always been sort of like striving for and everything. But like, is there anything in particular that you feel like drew you to higher ed and ed tech? 'Cause I feel like you could have maybe kind of gone different sort of angles or directions or anything in your career and everything. But like, what about maybe, higher ed and ed tech in particular feels like it's sort of drawn you in and kept you sort of engaged over all the years?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm one of those people who never really liked school, although I think I've always been constantly hungry to learn. In high school, I actually almost didn't graduate on time. It's a long story that I'll make short by saying I was able to take independent study classes from a local university to help me earn enough credits to finish. And that really started my love affair with distance education. But, in college, my academic path was in the humanities. And it was only when I learned to build websites in the late 90s and kind of experienced the rush of demand for that skill set that I started to piece my skills and interests together and arrived at distance education, online learning, and ed tech. But I'm a slow learner, and so even though I had worked in distance ed for a few years, it took me a little while to really understand the power that ed tech can have on people's lives. So, for example, I worked on Utah State University's fully online special education teacher certificate program. It's a way for teachers in some of the most remotest and most rural parts of the state, folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to access higher education, to gain the knowledge, the skills, and the credentials that they needed to help their local students, those students who had special needs or disabilities, to learn and thrive. And that's such a need, both within the state, but even throughout the country, that providing that access to those kinds of educational programs isn't just impactful for those teachers in those remote areas, but really, really impactful for the people that they serve, those kids in the classroom. So, that's one example of how over time I've just become more and more invested in this idea that education needs to leverage technology as a means to an end, and that end is, learning for everyone.
Yeah, and I guess there's a couple of thoughts in it. It's just, from your story, like your upbringing and just the work that you've done, just that, like, like you said, it's like the for a lot of times, like for online programs like that, it's like, okay, we know the tools, and the sort of experience that like kind of those folks need. We just need to be able to kind of get a modality that can deliver it to them. And, like you said, like digital tools being able to kind of enable that, but then even just sort of like flexibility and sort of, learning environments or anything like that. Like, it's just, if two very different and unique instances. So to just,
Mhm.
kind of flexibility and sort of the approach or sort of the access, like for you being able to do those independent study courses and everything, maybe it was just oh, that was just right. Like, I wasn't really well served by, the traditional high school model, or just, literally there were no options for people in rural Utah to get special education certifications or something. But it's just like, in sort of similar ways, I know just you've seen it a lot more nowadays, is that like, high schoolers can take college courses online or different things like that. But it's just like, I don't know, there's just a lot of thoughts swirling, I guess, where it is just sort
Yeah.
of like really, yeah, really empowering to be able to be a part of leveraging digital tools to, bring education to more people, whatever shape that takes. And like it sometimes is just sort of kind of
Yeah.
taking a similar model and fitting it into high school, or undergraduate programs, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and and it makes me think about one of those nuggets of wisdom that I guess I've developed over the years, which is that as powerful as educational technology is, or as powerful as technology is for education, it can be dangerous to overstate its purpose and its power. And by that I mean it's okay to, on the one hand, focus on the fundamental things that technology can help education do. It can open up access. It can help people connect, right? It can make things more flexible. It can save you time. Those are things that it can do really, really well and aren't particularly sexy, at least in terms of how we often think about educational technology as having transformative potential. That doesn't mean you have to ignore or neglect or set aside those transformational aspirations for ed tech, but that there's tremendous value, especially with educational institutions that are still struggling with problems that they've struggled with for years, if not decades, right? Technology can still serve a really powerful role there in terms of making those things easier, more accessible, more flexible, whatever. And expectations for that have changed quite a lot over the past 10 years, I would dare say, and they'll continue to increase.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is like a refreshing point of view. And I think that's definitely kind of indicator of the moment, is just sort of starting to kind of like come back down to earth a little bit, versus it being like, for like startups or something where it's like growth at all cost or anything like that. It's like you kind of need to be able to like, show your work and prove your sort of outcomes, and like that sort of thing just seems to really be kind of entering in, which obviously is just
Yeah.
great, especially in the education space. But yeah, it's like you don't want it to swing too far on the side where it's like, certainly coming out of the pandemic, some people I think we're like, great, we can get back to exactly the way we did it in 2019 or something. But like, thankfully, most people I think were sort of like, okay, yeah, we can kind of keep what worked, kind of throw off what didn't, and sort of go forward in sort of a digitally augmented new reality or something with,
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully sort of level setted expectations that aren't just sort of like, oh, well, if we just do this one thing, we're going to be, changing the world or doing, whatever else. It's like, you know, uh, and maybe this kind of like segues to sort of looking at sort of Instructure. You were there, like you said, from sort of the early days when they were really kind of breaking into the higher ed ecosystem in a big way and everything, where like uh, they weren't the first LMS, but they were just sort of the one that kind of hit in the right way at the right time. And it wasn't necessarily transformative in what they were doing, but like, I've just always known of, in the instances I've used Canvas, it's just super user friendly interface, and just, like there's a lot of, aspects of it that it was sort of a marginal improvement, but the impact and the outcomes were really powerful and really profound, and really kind of drove forward just, at least again, kind of at the very least, digitally augmented, sort of teaching experience for faculty and students and everything. So all that to be said, what are some reflections, I guess, you have? I mean, you spent much of your career at Instructure, starting at when they kind of launched formally the Canvas LMS that we all kind of know and love today. So like, you know, however you kind of want to take it, kind of reflecting on that journey that you were on, like anything that maybe you feel like would be kind of relevant and informative of, for folks that are navigating this current moment in ed tech.
Yeah, yeah. I think one reflection is sort of as I suggested, that taking care of the basics, solving problems that have been around for a long time, those are good things to do, and those are things that technology can help education do. I think oftentimes, educational technologists or ed tech company founders, they set out with a vision to really transform education through their technology, but that change is really hard. especially when you're trying to see that happen within systems of education that have been around for a long time and have have processes and policies and workflows that work for them, have cultures that are pretty well set in stone. Transformation is even harder, and we know that technology is a tool, and by itself it rarely instigates change. Although I will say, one of the things that I think Canvas did really, really well was to make the basics easy, but also entice or signal to users that they can get more value if they go a step further. If they use a tool, great. But did you know you can use the tool in this way as well? And if you do this thing, then you're going to have a ton of benefit in terms of time savings. So I do believe that technology can be designed to encourage people to do more, to do things better, as opposed to just sort of replicating what they've always done. But by and large, realizing transformation is really hard, and so you can expect people will more readily adopt technology that fits their existing mental models. So when you develop and deliver ed tech, you have to keep that in mind, and yet at the same time, you don't want to give up on that vision for a transformed future, and find a way that's somewhere perhaps in the middle of uh, of serving the educational practices of yesterday and today, while also enabling more innovative practices of tomorrow. So that's one thought. There's another thought too, though. I mean, kind of related to that idea of change and transformation. And I think the general consensus or that general understanding that technology is a tool that requires people, that requires initiatives to result in change. People matter as much or more than the technology in any kind of ed tech relationship. And by that I mean, of course, for technology providers, they need to constantly be paying attention to the people who are using the technology and the people who are affected or impacted by the technology. But also in terms of these technology providers themselves, the people within the company who are serving education, they've got to be committed, they've got to be dedicated, they've got to be moved by the vision, they've got to be doing the right things for the right reason. It's that kind of state that I think really fosters positive long-term relationships between educational institutions or providers and technology vendors.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of great points there. One, I had this sort of like thing that I thought of like easy to use, and then just sort of the like
Yeah.
you're rewarded for sort of like the depth or sort of like getting in kind of all the niches and stuff is like it, certain movies, especially like maybe like a comic book movie or whatever, where like it's great when anybody can enjoy it, but then it's that much more enjoyable if it's like, oh, you get all the Easter eggs or whatever. Like I feel
Oh,
like that's always just like, oh,
exactly.
that's so well done, it's so good. Like, and that idea where it's like, yeah, if you can design a platform or something that kind of hits on that same sort of like kind of experience where it's just like, oh yeah, like you can just jump right in, get a lot of great utility out of it, but if you get really into the depth, then you're going to be really kind of rewarded for kind of knowing all the other little sort of bells and whistles and everything. But I'm curious, I guess, for a
Yeah.
clarification, because you're using the word transformation, and I'm remembering some conversations I've had where like, yeah, like transformation, disruption, and everything. Like, there's certainly parts of higher education that are sort of ripe for that or overdue and everything, but like that some people have really kind of taken up the mantle of like, well, we just want to kind of reform sort of the structures and everything. And I guess just like as a quick follow-up, how you sort of feel about that sort of dichotomy, because I think we're kind of like in certain ways sort of like ebbing and flowing between them, and if that is just sort of like part of that sort of like human effort is really trying to like focus and not just almost like disrupting for its own sake or
Yeah.
anything like that. So I guess just any perspectives on that sort of dynamic as you sort of you know are a person who's trying to navigate change around implementing a new technology tool and stuff, like how are you kind of proceeding with how you're trying to make that happen?
Yeah, I think whether you're talking about education at the macro level or within a single institution or organization, there's room for both. There's room for both the application of technology to support existing practices and to help people who are in the job, in the culture, do the job the way that they expect to do it, and to have less pain and save time and do their job better. But I think there's also room for more radical innovation, often at the periphery, and you kind of see this in any kind of representation of an innovation adoption curve, where there's going to be those innovators and perhaps even early adopters that are trying something different. And not everything that they try or do will succeed, or even if it does succeed, be more broadly adopted within that culture or community. But some of it can and some of it will be. And so, just kind of reflecting on that question about the role of technology, I still think it needs to do both as best as it can. It can't just do one or the other, or it won't see the long-term educational change or improvement that it may be hoping to achieve. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was looking for, because I think it's, you know, trying to find that balance, because it was what you were saying of like, you need to sort of honor and serve what is and what came before, while still trying to move towards what should be, and what what we're striving towards. And
Yeah.
I think all of this is certainly to what your final point kind of was to this previous question, which is, again, refreshingly come up quite a bit in these conversations with higher ed IT leaders and stuff. It's just like the human factor. It's all about people working together, the change management aspect and all that, because I think, again, there's been sort of just a lot of sizzle and not as much focus on sort of the substance and the stake kind of thing. Like, you have to kind of get a substantial sort of, human buy-in, have sort of the support and sort of just kind of encouragement and nudging and just all that sort of like kind of the soft skills aspect of all this kind of stuff. Because you could have the most sort of flashy, dazzling tool that is really like, disruptive and all that, but like the sort of reforming aspect is acknowledging that humans crave, patterns and routines and, those sort of things. So they at least need to kind of be able to work from where they are towards where they want and need to go, and
Yeah.
understand why they're even kind of like going into sort of this whole exercise and everything. So I think that it is just a lot of great perspective to get, just like from even what I'm sure some people might sort of think of, like, oh, you worked in Instructure and y'all were just sort of like, selling all over the place, like everywhere, everyone was implementing Canvas. So like, sure, yes, but it would have undermined sort of the success if the folks who are sort of like, working with all these institutions weren't keeping stuff like that in mind, like not just being blind to the fact of sort of, being kind of human centered and,
Mhm.
kind of taking this sort of balanced approach of sort of transforming and reforming how these like kind of cultures were working.
Yeah, and I'll say that change and transformation within institutions is going to be a different level of priority for different institutions. When I was working at Instructure, I spent time with and worked with plenty of institutions that really just wanted a better LMS, and they were completely content to simply move or convert their courses over, and faculty are trained and everything's fine, right? But I also worked with plenty of institutions that saw the opportunity to change LMS as an opportunity for them to change or improve how teaching and learning happened within the institution, whether that was simply to embark on a course quality improvement initiative that coincided with the adoption of a new LMS, where every single instructor worked with an instructional designer to level up their course design, their learning activities, et cetera, as they moved to Canvas. Or it was a larger transformative initiative, such as launching an entirely new online degree program to reach new audiences that they hadn't otherwise reached before. So I do think that's going to vary from institution to institution. For those institutions that are prioritizing internal transformation or change, yeah, again, people matter as much as or more than the technology. And I think going forward, we're going to hear from higher ed institutional leaders that even when they have the right leadership with the right vision to implement change, they're going to find that they're struggling to get the right human resources to help their broad, dispersed, sometimes siloed teams or units or departments to work together toward that initiative. And so I think going forward, a lot of institutions will look to the educational technology providers to support them on that human side in terms of planning and realizing their change initiatives.
Yeah, all just really great, points to be made and sort of interfaced with, because I think this sort of like sobering moment I feel like we're in, because we're like, obviously, like, it went so hard on just like everything's digital, everything's online, like, campuses are closed and everything, and now just sort of taking stock and inventory about what tools, how we're using them, how are we sort of supporting people and training people and evaluating things. So I think it is a very interesting moment, and I'm going to kind of take this as sort of two separate questions of just sort of like, certainly there's you work with a lot of different startups and everything, and want to kind of honor that side of sort of the current landscape, but looking, I guess, like, to this current moment and sort of the future and everything, but like, what excites you about like sort of digital tools, student institutional success? Because I think, again, it is just sort of like refreshing that these are the kind of conversations that I think a lot of people are having right now, that we're sort of going through as well. But it's tough stuff, I guess, and it could be the idea of like, man, we're kind of trying to grapple with everything here, but to kind of take an optimistic lens, what excites you about this current moment for digital tools and student and institutional success?
Yeah, I think a couple of things excite me in terms of their potential to drive change and transformation in education. One of those things is the conversation that was started during and after the pandemic, and I shouldn't say started, the conversation that was revitalized during and after the pandemic about what a good course looks like, what a good learning experience looks like, and what the role of these tools and technologies are in facilitating a good learning experience. I think the pandemic certainly brought into question, once again, the value of a lecture style class. And I know plenty of faculty who would say, well, I don't know anybody who teaches a pure lecture course. Yeah, but the research shows that at least 50% of courses are still taught in largely a lecture format, and students are checking out, and that's super obvious these days. Maybe even more obvious post-pandemic than during the pandemic. So I think the revitalized conversation about what makes an effective learning experience and what the faculty members' role should be in that, and what support they need in order to deliver more engaging and effective learning experiences is super powerful, super vital, and has a lot of potential. And by support for those teaching experiences, I mean both in terms of technology and in terms of campus staff, such as instructional designers, who are really well equipped and, in my experience, extremely hungry to help instructors make the most out of the time that they have with their students. So I think that focus is going to enable a lot of educational technology companies who perhaps in the past had really exciting or interesting solutions to support, say, active learning or collaborative learning, really come into the spotlight and get more attention. And perhaps that will be prioritized in terms of academic technology budgets, right? Where departments or institutions might say, yeah, we've all got an LMS, but maybe we need something else. Maybe we need something that helps, our more adventurous faculty go beyond the traditional, way of teaching, or that support our instructional designers and helping those faculty provide more active learning or collaborative learning opportunities. And I think that might be a trend that then results in more ed tech companies investing more in that kind of instructional tool that really does support, more effective active learning that's supported by research. So that's number one. Number two is, I think again, sort of a result of the times is the focus that many institutions do now have on student success as sort of a early indicator of institutional success. And there's so many ways that we could talk about student success, from engagement to student dropouts and retention to career placement to returning for lifelong learning. There's a lot of ways to talk about student success, but I think the current time where a lot of institutions are still experiencing down enrollments, from pre-pandemic levels. They're seeing fewer high school graduates in the future. They know that there's greater competition for the students they might normally serve, both within, say, the workforce, but also from other institutions around the world that are offering fully online degree programs in, highly sought after fields, perhaps even at a lower price than they can offer locally. So I think, that pressure on institutions to attract and retain students and deliver the return on investments that's fully satisfying to those students and to the public is real, and will motivate institutions to think about how they put that academic path in front of students. And so one of the things that excites me there, and this is one of the cool things that I see Pathify as working to address, is that there's so much of the students' experience within higher ed that is about jumping through hoops, or trying to connect the dots, or just trying to do the business of being a student, in addition to, right, focusing on their coursework, trying to build relationships, enjoying the college life. That it's up to institutions to kind of figure out, how do we simplify this, how do we connect the dots for the students, how do we help them help themselves in terms of finding engagements and accessing the services that they need. And I just think it's about time that the technology was prioritized to help students, not just in their coursework, as perhaps Canvas has done, but throughout their academic life, both curricular and co-curricular, and just eliminate some of that time and effort and frustration that's spent on the required box checking and hoop jumping that still is necessary for a student in higher ed.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate so much, what you said there, because I think it's that idea of like relevancy, it's just sort of this like big, kind of sticking point where like, there's a sort of perception of, just a lack of value, relevancy for higher ed. But it's like, okay, well, let's start to break that down and create learning environments, that are engaging students in new and innovative ways. And I feel like there is just sort of a, some momentum, some trends that are just sort of carrying us through to kind of keep a mindset that is sort of open to what all the possibilities are, kind of using our imagination about like learning experiences and everything. But then just like how you're kind of getting at like, how are we kind of surfacing and kind of delivering information and resources, and just the kind of path that a student needs to take. Because like with all of these things, it's like you just start to kind of keep kind of incrementally increasing sort of the friction, and eventually it is going to be the point where somebody's like, it's not worth my time, even if like the learning experiences I was getting are, incredible and amazing. I'm hitting so much friction on all the sort of just business of being a student. It's like, I got to bail out because it's taking me so much time. I can't even like, focus on anything else. But, the inverse also being true of like the courses are just so like, cumbersome or boring or whatever. I'm just like slogging through them, and I can't even sort of like, I'm drowning and can't even kind of come up for air to do much else of like, the fun social stuff, or, kind of take care of myself and take advantage of these support resources. So it is that idea of like, all of it kind of needs to be sort of, throttled, all the kind of switchboard is, like, oh, you need to give a little bit more of this, a little less of that, and all that, and all needs to sort of like balance and equal out. And that if you can kind of create those, create sort of the infrastructure that can sort of just, create more efficiency, more time saved. That's more, opportunities for students to just enjoy their time and do more. That's going to be more fulfilling for them, and everything else. So I think, there's definitely a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential, for the folks out there that are listening to kind of take that intentionality, try to sort of interface with where you are, where you want to be, where you see sort of the friction, pain points and everything. And, try to create that kind of digital infrastructure that sort of serves students, which would then serve your institutional success.
I think going forward, for many students, feasible is not good enough in terms of being able to work through the requirements of of their academic career. I think there is some research that shows that hitting these brick walls or dead ends in terms of navigating the processes and requirements of a college degree can be a factor in student dropouts. It's not the major factor, but it can be a factor. But I think now more than ever, probably culturally, at least in America, our mindset is like, hey, as Salvador Dali said, right? It's either easy or impossible. And I know he meant that in a different context, but I think for us today, when we think about how we interact with different systems and institutions, companies, and organizations, we just expect it to be easy. And if it's not, then that can be a real barrier, or at least a real turnoff to continuing proceeding or being able to make it through. It certainly is, I think, a distraction from the parts of the educational experience that really truly matter.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, and again, a kind of not exact sort of like correlation, but like I've had to deal with sort of like, getting insurance to pay for like a fender bender or whatever. And it's like, I don't do that very often. And it's one of those like sort of bureaucratic processes, and like higher ed can be that way sometimes, like overly complicated or something. So it's just like that idea of like, we hope and expect, and, it should be easy, but then, at a certain point I'm hitting friction, and it's like, I can see why a lot of people would probably start this, just try to get insurance to pay for like car repairs and just bail out, because it's sort of like, the system presumes how everything works or whatever, so it's like, yeah, like as much as we can try to alleviate
Yeah.
that, in any sort of instance, yeah, certainly time well spent.
Yeah, and you said something key there. You said the system presumes that you know how this works, and that I think relates directly to an observation that many have made about higher education, how it serves students equitably. That is to say, students who come into college or university with some family experience in college or university are more likely to succeed because they have a mental model and they have support resources within their family group that they can rely on. They simply know better, or at least have access to the knowledge of how this system works. Whereas students who come from families where they are the first generation college students, where they're otherwise disadvantaged, they're going to struggle more in a complicated system, even if there are resources available to them within that system to help them navigate it. Oftentimes we sort of get frustrated when we reach a dead end, or an obstacle in the road. And yeah, I think that is a significant factor in whether or not those students who arguably need education more are going to be able to persist and succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, TLDR, simplify the systems, use technology to help you do that.
Yeah, that's the title of the episode. And I guess I want to kind of honor the space that you're in now. So you're bringing all this sort of rich perspectives and experience to helping serve other folks who are trying to sort of help with that sort of issue. Simplifying user experiences in higher education, or any number of other obviously things these different ed tech startups and stuff are doing. But like, again, we're in this sort of cooling VC market, and just sort of interesting moment in terms of just sort of the kind of just really rapid growth and investment that the sector was seeing over the past couple of years. So I guess really quickly, just like any sort of like things that you're seeing ahead for this space as we sort of emerge and sort of calibrate to kind of all the stuff we've been talking about, or really kind of the substance and sort of the the human perspective and everything else. How do you think that's going to kind of play out for ed tech startups?
Yeah, I think ed tech startups who address those two main areas that I talked about as being kind of exciting will be more likely to succeed. And those areas being, making it easy to improve effective learning. And I think that's especially important in the developing age of AI. And then also those who are able to help institutions improve some of those fundamental outcomes of the quote unquote business of higher ed that are so important for them in terms of sustainability and institutional success. Attracting students, retaining students, helping students achieve, career ready goals and skills, and bringing students back throughout their lifetime for more learning. So So ed tech companies that can do either of those two things, in my book, are very promising and have a high likelihood of finding a match in higher ed. At the same time, as anybody who's worked in ed tech knows, it's really, really hard to be successful in general, right? Education is an industry where budgets are pretty tight, and oftentimes institutions are, arguably underfunded, and finding budget for new technology initiatives can be really, really difficult. I think it's also worth noting that, I think because society values education so much and recognizes how important it is, that puts some additional requirements and uh, raises the bar in terms of technology criteria that ed tech providers must deliver. And by that, I mean, the technology has to be accessible so that students with any kind of disability can have the same quality experience as students without. The technology's got to be secure, absolutely has to be secure. And we've heard over the years more and more stories of hacking targeting educational institutions and their vendor providers. Uh, it's got to protect individuals' privacy. It's got to be reliable, like it can't go down during finals week or during registration week. The data has to be accessible so that it can actually be valuable to administrators and leaders. The technology has to be interoperable so that it can work with all the myriad different systems across all the different departments and units to deliver a relatively seamless student or faculty experience. So those are just some examples of some of the requirements that education puts on technology that are all, I think, reflective of our general understanding that education is critical to society, and therefore it must also deliver these things in addition to whatever value the technology itself adds. Oh, and it's also got to be affordable. So you have that.
Yeah, it is quite the tall order, and I think it's the idea of like I'm sure you're having these kind of conversations with folks who are maybe looking to get into the space or try to grow a new venture, where it's like you gotta try to like anticipate as many of those things as possible, if not all of them, because like those are gonna be the questions that you're getting, and
Yeah.
just so I think the idea of like honoring all of that in a climate where there's probably just going to be that much more added scrutiny, um, on just sort of, especially just kind of delivering on the outcomes kind of promised and everything, is definitely going to be an interesting climate for different startups and everything. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, and
so
I don't say those things to scare people off. I say that to help people develop realistic expectations on both sides, right? Like uh, educational institutions and purchasers or academic tech leaders need to understand that technology providers are under a tremendous amount of pressure and have a lot of requirements in terms of developing their technology to both meet those sort of non-functional requirements as well as deliver the value that their institution is looking for. But also on the ed tech provider side, if you're an ed tech founder and you don't understand what is required in order to play in the education landscape, um, you might burn out in a couple of years. You might under resource the development of your technology, and you might be leaving a lot of institutions hanging when you go under. So it's not a good thing on either side if you don't set appropriate realistic expectations and come in with that commitment that education might be a more difficult industry to serve in terms of delivering technology, but it's also one of those few industries where everybody feels really, really good about the work they're doing every single day.
yeah, and I mean it is that idea of like knowing a lot of folks in this space where it's like like they all kind of care about that mission, and the idea of like increasingly I think people kind of get a lot of those things, maybe not to the extent that they could or should, but just the idea of like they are sort of accepting that challenge. Like they're just sort of
Yeah.
like, okay, like I'm gonna meet that moment and like do it because I do really care about doing this work and everything. So I think it's kind of a call to action, where it's just like, hey, these are the stakes, this is like what you gotta, the rules you can have to follow and everything. And then folks who are like really committed sort of following through on that is really, really awesome to see. um And yeah, I mean, as we're kind of coming in for landing here, we will ask our final question, which I'm very curious and would love to hear what you think. What does a connected campus look and or feel like to you?
A connected campus is something that a student, a staff member, a faculty member experiences when they can access the people, the services, the resources that they need whenever they want, wherever they want. And it's not department by department, it's cross campus. And across campus, those units don't just know about each other. In some ways, they're integrated with each other. They're working together to deliver the experience that results in the best outcomes in the most efficient way possible.
I like it. I mean, that's absolutely what I think it should be as well. In addition to all the number of ways that folks have answered this question so far, it's been really awesome to hear everyone's perspectives, and it was really great chatting with you and just hearing, your background and stories and experience, perspectives and advice and all that good stuff. So we'll have ways to connect with you and the work that you do for folks to kind of keep the conversation going. But yeah, just thanks so much for hanging out.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to The Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Connected Campus.